Hi, Jason.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right. It's a dreary Friday morning here in Cardiff. How is it at your neck of the woods?
Well, the rain stayed off, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's not as nice as it has been.
No, I know
Yeah,
we've had a
little bit of a glimpse of summer.
we've had a couple of corkers this week, haven't we? But
Yeah, it just didn't last, unfortunately.
never does, Jason. Never does.
No, never does.
Now, Jason, you recently finished with us on the CRIW apprenticeship back in
Yes.
May. We were talking about this earlier. What was great about you, Jason, is that you sort of knew when you came in to the CRIW apprenticeship, you sort of knew what department you really wanted to specialize in. So
Yes. Yes.
I just wondered where the sound interest, where it all began with you. Was it in school, or was it college, or was it just something that you picked up on in watching stuff and thought, sound department, that's the one for me?
I think it was. I think sort of talking to other people within the department as well. I think this kind of seems to be a bit of a recurring theme. But I think it started off with sort of having a musical interest in school.
Right.
And then I think as part of the sort of um, curriculum, then when you're doing sort of music in school, you start to do a bit of sort of the recording side using some of the digital sort of audio workstation software on their computers. And then you start to sort of play around with things on there, like different effects and things, and work out how they sort of work.
I
Um,
see.
and I think from there, then I went from there then to carry on studying music, and they had a module doing basically like a follow-on from that, doing sort of music based on using MIDI um, protocol, which is sort of a way of sort of notating into a digital audio workstation,
Right.
and sort of then manipulating it with different effects, etc. And then as a follow-on from that, then there was a recording module that focused on sort of pure audio.
Right.
So I did that one, which included more sort of recording sort of instrumentalists, and you sort of had to sort of set up the microphones in their rooms, and you had to do a bit of you didn't have to, but I wanted to do it, so there was an optional thing that you could do some recording from the Cardiff University Music Hall.
All right.
So basically they had like a console at the top, and they sort of had all the microphones pre-rigged, and you could sort of fade ones up and down and try and get a bit of a balance and have like a bit of a go of mixing that. And during when they had concerts on, so obviously it wasn't being used for anything official, but you could go up there, and when they had a concert on, you could actually try and do this almost sort of live mixing. And I think as part of
Fantastic.
that module, they started teaching us things about microphones and the pickup patterns, and a lot more of the technical sort of technical side of it.
Right.
And I thought because I'd always sort of thought that that sort of side of it might go over my head a bit, but
Yeah.
actually I was really interested in it. I was really interested in how sort of the different sort of blends of the microphones affected the acoustics in the hall, and how sort of the overhead microphones captured all the sort of reverberance of the hall. And you had different sort of spot mics that went up closer towards the instruments, so without you having to sort of rig anything up, but you sort of knew that they'd sort of put them in the optimum positions, but you could have that sort of chance of sort of learning how to hear it.
I
So I
see.
thought, so it sort of opened up the idea then that I thought, well, maybe sort of musical recording was the way that maybe I wanted to go, sort of
Yeah.
in terms of a career. So I started looking at things like that, and I actually was quite lucky then. I wasn't working within that field. I did a lot of retail work then, but then I was
Right.
quite lucky. I was quite lucky that I actually got the opportunity. There was like an open day, and I can't remember what the scheme was. It was a magazine in Cardiff. They did like an open doors thing where you could go into different companies.
All right.
Um,
Okay.
and I had a look at one of the recording studios that was I sort of sat in with them, that was doing some of this recording. And it was interesting, and I did enjoy being there. I wasn't quite sure if that was the way I wanted to go.
Right. Okay.
Especially as it seemed very much it wasn't necessarily sort of an industry that was so much connected.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
so and then I sort of thought, well, I'll take a couple of years out now, see maybe what I want to do, and then maybe see if I need to go back and do like a master's or something. But
Yeah.
obviously, I was thinking, number one, the expense.
Yeah.
If you're doing something that you don't necessarily, if you're doing something that you're not necessarily going to follow that field, or they might not be working it afterwards. That was the big thing. And I thought, well, I don't really want to be doing this. I want to be sure. And then I was just applying for it, different things to do with sound in
Yeah.
particular, rather than necessarily the film sort of TV side. I'd always been interested in the film and TV sort of side, because I did actually, when I was doing that course, I actually did, my dissertation was actually on film music and the film scores, and it was about how the way it was edited. So
Okay.
so I had that sort of interest in film from that sort of side. And then I was applying for different things. And then I had the opportunity then to do a week's work experience with Film Cymru.
Okay. Yeah. How did that come
Yeah,
about? Was that an application, or was it just literally sending out CV to them, or?
yeah. So that was, I was looking online at different things, and said anything that was sort of basically to do with sound. I was just applying for, to try and see what was about.
Yeah.
And they got a post out on social media. It was when they were first sort of starting their Foot in the Door project,
Right.
and they were putting out. I just saw a sign saying, you could apply for work experience doing a Netflix feature. It was, so it was a
Okay.
big,
Wow.
quite a big thing.
Yeah.
And basically they do like they do a bit of sort of set preparation with you, and then you go on there to do a work experience week. But it wasn't full hours, it was just a couple of hours a day,
Right. Okay.
um just to get a taster of that sort of area, and see if that was the sort of thing for you. And then the production company that did that film,
Yeah.
they got back in touch with Film Cymru and said they wanted to take a couple of people on from that production to be trainees on their next production.
Right.
So I was actually chosen then as one of those trainees. So I went in then again with the sound department, and actually worked on a feature film, which was really interesting because it was a short one, but it was
Yeah.
also sick. There were at that time it was 6-day weeks.
Right. Okay.
So it was quite an interesting sort of setup as well, just to try and get used to the logistics of it. And basically from then, like I said, I had a really good experience, and I kept in touch with the team. And they kind of were working on things at the time where they couldn't take anybody, they couldn't have extra people on, for
Right.
example. But I sort of
Yeah.
kept in touch with them. And then it ended up being that I kind of ended up going back into retail work then.
Right. Could you just
After
not
that,
find?
because
Could you just not find work then? Is that a problem?
the I think it was more the fact that I wasn't fully aware of how sort of the industry properly worked as well. And then I kind of got the opportunity then to go in back as a runner. And I knew that I wanted to go back into the sound department because having done it, I'd sort of realized that it was very different from what I knew on the, like I said, the studio sort of side. But I actually really liked that sort of dynamic and that sort of side of it as well.
So what were you doing when you discovered CRIW? Where did you find CRIW? Did you find it on our website, or had you heard of somebody that had been on the scheme? Or
because I was still on Film Cymru's mailing list from when I'd done those before.
Yeah.
So they'd sent a message to us that were on their list that have done things with them previously.
Yeah.
And invited us to this like a local like a screen summit that was being done in Newport.
Right. Okay.
So I went along to that, and Sue Jeffries was one of the speakers.
Ah, okay.
So they were like it was a bit like a quick fire panel. So they had people in talking, and then they'd go off, and then they'd have another group on talking. So didn't really get a chance to sort of speak to the speakers sort of that much after it.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually get a chance to meet Sue then, but I remember she was chatting about different things. So I remember I was just making notes of different things. So I signed up. So I signed up to the Skill Cymru newsletter from that, and that's how I found out about Skill Cymru. And then I went to on one of the newsletters. Then it was talking about that Skill Cymru were running a networking workshop in Central Square in Cardiff.
Right.
So I went to that, and again, Sue was heading that.
Right.
And they gave us all like a little leaflet at the end with upcoming things that were going on. So I sort of started trying to go to these sort of different like creative mornings and things that they do in Cardiff. And one of the things that was mentioned on there was the CRIW apprenticeships.
Okay.
So when that opened, I thought when I saw then from the Skill Cymru newsletter that the apprenticeships had opened, but I remember then thinking I'd seen that on that post on that leaflet. So I thought, so that's when I went, and that's when I applied for it basically.
Right.
But that's how I heard about Skill and how I heard about the CRIW scheme.
So you got your place. You started with us at Skill Cymru.
Yes.
Run me through, or tell me about your placements that you had during your year. Maybe start from the beginning, or start with your favourite. I know you don't want to say your favourite, your least and your worst was, but your best. But they were all different type of productions, weren't they?
Yes, yeah, it was really good range of experience. So the first production I went on was an S4C drama called Dalameft, and it was the second series of that. So a lot of the crew that were on that had worked with each other on the first series.
Right.
So that was an interesting one because I'd obviously, like I said before, I'd had some experience in the past from the sort of looking at the film sort of side of it, but this was quite different, especially because it was a TV drama that was almost like a lower budget as well, I think, because of the type of production. But it was a really good experience, I said, because a lot of the crew already knew each other, so they kind of had that sort of working relationship, so they could sort of pass that on to me as to kind of different sort of nuances to what people were like as well. and it was quite fast paced.
Right. Okay.
So it was very much there was a lot going on at once, and things were sort of constantly changing and evolving. And I think at the beginning, I think it seemed a little bit daunting at the beginning to try and get used to that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
as it went on, I said, you kind of get used to that, and you almost see it as a bit of like a bit of a puzzle to try and get everything sort of working together, and that becomes quite fun.
So Dalamaeus had opened your eyes a bit, and you'd had a really good flavour of the Welsh language.
Yes,
What
yes.
came next? What came next for you, Jason?
After that, then I went on to a feature film called Man in My Basement.
Ah, right, okay.
And that was very, very different because that was quite a there was a lot more budget in that one, and there was some there was a lot more that it was a very different setup.
Okay.
So it was interesting because that was with it's actually quite funny because that was with the team that I'd actually had my first paid trainee job on beforehand that I was talking about earlier.
Yes, yes.
That I'd sort of kept in touch with and didn't really have anything that could come up at that time.
Okay.
And it was actually a very strange one because I remember there was like a meetup for different people in sort of sound departments that I'd happened to see online, and I thought, oh, I'll go along to that. And that's when I saw Chris, who was actually the boom op that was on that I
Yeah.
hadn't seen for ages. And he was sort of asking me, saying, "Oh, get back in touch with Dayan because I think he's got something sort of coming up in January." So I said, "Well, I'm doing the crew apprenticeship." I said, "But I'll tell them about it, and
Yeah.
I'll mention to I'll mention to Dayan as well." Well, anyway, that was on that weekend, and then I think actually then the week after, Nadine had asked me about this, said, "Oh, there might be a job coming up now. There might be a placement coming up now in the new year." So I said, "Oh, great." So basically, then it sort of transpired that it was the same one. So
Oh my
I think
gosh.
Nadine had already. I think Nadine had already spoken to the production to try and get me onto that.
Right.
And Dayan had spoken to production to try and say that he wanted to try and get a trainee onto that of some kind. So anyway, so it sort of met up quite nicely that then I ended up being the trainee on that.
Fantastic.
So that's worked out really well. But yeah, it was a very different setup, that one. It was really interesting because obviously the technology had moved on from when I'd done it before. So everything was on cable was now being done wirelessly like it was on Dalamaeus.
Ah, right, okay.
So it was very different. So it's obviously it's getting used to that sort of side of the technology as well. But it's
Yeah.
also I think because it was a film rather than TV series, it was a lot more. I think everything was a lot more streamlined in terms of the process. So
Uh-huh.
you kind of had more things that you knew you go in, you do this, you do that, and the other. But also, I think having done Dalamaeus before as well, it also meant that then they kind of knew I'd had more sort of training, so they could kind of give me more responsibility on different things.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot more things like packing away some of the radio mics and doing some of the setting certain things up for them that wouldn't necessarily have that sort of responsibility of before. And then obviously with the big thing with that film as well was then that they did some studio work, which I'd never done any of that before. So that was interesting trying to get used to that. To studio work, and they also did some green screen elements as well.
Ah,
So,
right, okay.
so that was interesting. So I was trying to get used to those sorts of that's those sorts of way of working as well. And obviously there was a lot more. It was quite a big crew on that one, so it was logistically it was very different. But I think it was good to see sort of the two sort of sides of it really as well.
Yeah, of course. And then you got a chance as well during your apprenticeship, didn't you, to go to a post-production house, to Gorilla?
Yes, that was really good to get that sort of opportunity and see that sort of side of it. Because I think from what I gathered when I was speaking to a lot of the the location sort of sound crew, is that a lot of the time I think quite a few of those had come from a post sort of production background and gone into the location side, but a lot of them were telling me that there's also a bit of an element of disconnect. So the sound mixer likes to sort of get in touch with the sort of editorial side and the dubbing sort of side to try and find out what their requirements are, so obviously they can set everything up and try and keep a dialogue going between them. But I think that seems to be sort of not a newer thing, but a thing that is becoming more standard now, whereas before there was almost a bit of a disconnect between sort of the location side and the post-production side. So I think for me, I think seeing the post-production side, you can see what can be sort of achieved and what sort of things can be cleaned up, what can't be cleaned up, how the dialogue is sort of treated in a post-production scenario as well, how the dubbing sort of side of it works. And I think that kind of gave me a bit more perspective then when I went back onto location as well, to sort of see what was and what wasn't specifically needed. But also I also think though that having seen the post-production side of it as well, I've really enjoyed that side of it a lot more than I thought I was going to enjoy. So I think that's also potentially something that gives me sort of food for thought in the sort of future as well.
So then you were nearing the end of your apprenticeship, Jason. What was your last placement?
My last placement was on another film called Salvable,
right?
Which was that was a really interesting one as well. That was a good experience. That was again that was a lower budget than the previous film.
Okay.
So it didn't, weirdly, it was like a hybrid of that kind of structure that you had with the film from the Man in My Basement, and a lot of the way that, say, like Dal Myth was run as that kind of quick turnover for TV. So it was like a quick turnover, even it wasn't television, it was films, but you kind of had the same kind of setup style as with the film, and the same sort of logistical issues as with the film, but then you had a bit of the turnover style as with the Dalamith sort of side of it. And I think with that one in particular, because it was another low budget production, I think what tends to happen with the lower budgets is they obviously have less of a crew in general. So people it tends to be a bit faster paced. So people tend to pick up or try and cover bits of responsibility of other crew members.
I see.
And I think there's a fine line, I think, with anything like that where you're maybe doing things of a role that's higher up than you that you shouldn't be doing, because that's a role sort of higher up than you, and you get in the experience to do those bits of that role so that you can step up towards it. because
Yeah.
obviously you can't get if you can't get the experience doing it, you know, you can't really then go on and try and do that step up. So I
No.
think actually having the ability to do that, I think that kind of, for me, that felt like I got a lot of that sort of side in that maybe a second assistant would be doing in the earlier sort of stages. So I kind of felt, but obviously still as a trainee, so there was the less responsibility of getting that wrong to an extent.
Yeah.
But it made me think a lot more. There was a lot more that you can kind of think sort of, you have to be a bit more sort of thinking a bit more autonomously about,
Yeah.
having been told it, and then you kind of just you get into that sort of rhythm. So I think for me, in terms of training, that was a very good training exercise for me, I think, because you kind of get to that, you get to that sort of step up stage quicker.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
Would you
yeah.
say? Would you say, Jason, in the year that you've been on the apprenticeship, would you say, obviously you've learned a lot, but what about making contacts and stuff and meeting the same crew members? Have you made a lot of contacts in the last year?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I've mentioned that that there were crew that I'd worked with previously, and I sort of kept in
Yeah.
contact with them. But for the majority of it, there were new new sound mixers and new boom operators and new assistants that I hadn't met before.
Right.
And a lot of them had very different backgrounds. So, for example, with Dalamith, we had the main sound mixer and the main boom operator. They were finishing off a job in the Caribbean.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So basically, um, oh, sorry, no, the boom operator wasn't, but the sound mixer was. So
Right.
basically, he'd taken a couple of weeks off front of the production to get everything sort of cleared with customs.
Right.
Um, so he was covered by another sound mixer at the start. So obviously that meant that when we were a few weeks into it, then I'd met two sound mixers and a new boom operator, and then the sound mix, and then the boom operator went on, had a week's holiday pre-booked to the production. So then he was covered then by another boom operator who was based in Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, and then when we went to do the pickups, then we had another sound mixer in to cover Bryn, who was the main sound mixer, and we had and then Sarah, who was the boom operator that was covering Mick. She was back for that section as well. So
All right. Okay.
basically, that meant that so when I thought about it, I thought, so that meant that I'd sort of met three sound mixers and two boom operators on the same job, basically.
Wow.
Um, so I've tried to sort of keep in contact with each of them.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult because obviously it's keeping in contact with people is quite difficult, I think, because especially when they're busy, it's harder to
Yes.
kind of get a bit of a conversation going. But I try and keep in contact with them, and I found that some in terms of all the contacts I've made, that sort of side of it, I find some of them are quite easy to keep in contact with on through things like WhatsApp, which I've got their numbers from now, and they've said,
Yeah.
you know, keep in contact. Um, some of them I email to sort of have a bit of back and forth with them, and then there's
Yeah.
others that I think because they are going through quite busy periods, or that when they were covering, they have like usual teams that they work with.
Right.
So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think for them in particular, I tend to have more dialogue with them when I sort of meet them in person,
I
and
see.
I tend to find that there are more um sort of things going on now occasionally, like sort of industry meetups and some sound meetups that they kind of do like once or twice, like a few times a year. And I try and go along to those to try and sort of keep in touch with people and see what's going on.
Okay, brilliant.
So yeah, so I definitely think I've made some good contacts this year, and also everyone that I've worked with that's not been in the department as well.
Yeah, that's nice.
So I've tried to make it a bit of a thing to try and keep in contact with them, or even just sort of adding them on things like social media and see if you can keep in contact in the loop with what's going on with them there.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I find that an easier way of kind of sort of passively seeing what people are on as well, and then you can sort of get in touch with them and say, I hope everything's going well.
Yeah, of
And that sort of
course.
side of it. Yeah.
Of course. And then I know I know you're going on holiday tomorrow for a week, but tell me what's coming up for you in the future?
So I'm going on to a Channel 4 production called The Change.
Oh yes,
So it's
yeah,
the
second series,
the
isn't it?
yeah, second series. That's it. So that's I think that's sort of based sort of Caldecott way. So I'm
Right,
going on
okay.
to that. I
That's
believe
not far from you, Jason.
until mid of August. No, it's not. This is nice. Yeah, yeah, it's really nice to have that sort of on my doorstep. I mean, yeah, because obviously usually there's quite a bit of traveling
Yeah, of
involved as well.
course.
Like I remember with some productions that I was working on as part of the placement, there were some days that were sort of other side of Swansea, which was about an hour and a half,
Yeah.
2 hours sort of away.
Yeah, you don't want
Which
that, do you?
which was no, it's good experience to do, but obviously it's
Yeah.
nice to have something on the doorstep, um, as well. But two, I think three of the team that I've seen that are attached to it so far are ones that I met on the course of this apprenticeship.
Oh my gosh,
So
okay.
so yeah, so that's so it's I think that's good that in terms of how that works in terms of the contact sort of side of it as well. That there's
Yeah.
starting to be now names that I'm recognizing.
Yeah, but that's great. That is great. That's what
Yeah,
you want, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
you've got holiday and then a nice 6-week drama to come back to.
Yes, yeah.
Fun, fun,
which is a great way of doing it.
yeah,
um,
fantastic. Because
yeah, like,
we know the nature of the beast, especially on the crew
mm,
apprenticeship. You come on and off jobs as it is out there. And in a way,
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
you're going into, isn't it?
yes, it is. Because when I finished with the crew apprenticeship, I had a few I said I had a few weeks off, um, where I was sort of trying to start up the sort of freelancing side of it. It's just sort of getting in touch with people and emailing people, and finding out about what's going on. Um,
Yeah,
but I think also because it actually been quite busy on, let's say, on the apprenticeship. I think I sort of had placements basically from like the start of the year. So it was actually
mm.
quite nice to have those weeks off as well. So
Oh my gosh, yeah, I
I was sort
bet.
of approaching it that way. So yeah, that was nice. And also um there were certain things that I picked up during the apprenticeship as well, where like they were saying as a trainee, the uh the mixer provides the equipment and all the bits and bobs. But then obviously when you're sort of stepping up, you're expected to have certain things on you as well, like consumable bits of kit. Um,
Yes.
and I think there were certain things that were coming up during different productions where they're saying, "Oh, this will be handy to have. That would be handy to have." So I've tried to sort of put a bit of a little sort of quick sort of kit together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Starting with things like certain tapes and just like a handy pair of scissors and little pouches that to put on you. I think it's those tips that I've picked up as to what would be handy. So I've kind of used those weeks to try and put a bit of that together as well.
Yeah, great.
So
That's good.
so that'll be handy.
Definitely. Well, listen, Jason, it's been lovely catching up with you.
Yeah. It's been good to speak to you as well, Lisa.
And have a good holiday.
Fab, thank you.
And keep in touch with us now when you're working on the change.
Will do, definitely.
Okay, bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye, Lisa.